Here I am. I think it's time for another Sync Century video. I unlisted the last video I made about my health situation. That's because I am serious about pursuing it legally, and I've been advised that it's probably not good to share too much information about it publicly until I've spoken to my attorney at some length. So, because that's the route I'm trying to take, it's offline for now. It'll be back online someday, as will further videos I've shot about all of that stuff. For now, it's got to just be something we acknowledge more in the background. I can talk about it probably in general terms. My care was botched at a local hospital, and I'm suffering various consequences as a result of that. I'm in a lot of pain every day. I'm no longer taking opioid pain medication, thankfully. Managing with ibuprofen and Tylenol and marijuana. Takes the edge off a bit, but it's just still a lot of pain and discomfort, unfortunately. So I'm very much in a mood, though, to continue thinking about pain and suffering and blood pyramids, because what happened to me is very much a result of being poor and living in a poor area of the city where the standards of care are very, very, very low. And it's an embarrassment and a travesty that that's the way that it is in the United States, but it's just hard evidence of the bloodiness of the blood pyramid in this society. I said that before. I said it was just as bloody. It's funny, I didn't imagine that I was going to live through such an experiential proof of that fact. Everyone's living through experiential proofs of it right now, at least vicariously watching these police brutality videos and things. Yeah, it's abuse by the state authority, power structure, whatever we want to call it. It's a very direct abuse. When it comes to the police. In the healthcare system, it's neglect, but neglect is still abuse, particularly neglect from big authority structures like this that are meant to take care of you. Because the whole point of this stuff is that when individuals experience a body collapse or experience traumatic violence of some sort, whether they're being robbed from or directly physically attacked or etc., such that they have to call in the state to help them. In both of those situations, if the state ends up creating more harm than good, they're responsible for that, in my view. But because it's a blood pyramid, there's never accountability. That's rather the point of the blood pyramid, is that people have to be actually terrified. So the stakes have to actually be real, but then everyone engages in this weird repression game about it in order to pretend like the stakes aren't real. It's a very funny thing about it, because in some way everyone has to be in denial about the fact that they're living in a blood pyramid. If you really grasped it completely consciously, well, you'd be in the same position I'm in, which is I'm pretty much a radicalized citizen, in the sense that I think the government no longer has unfortunately, they've forfeited their privilege to rule. Now, I really mean that, unfortunately, because you really don't want to see what happens to a society that goes through this kind of blood pyramid inversion that we seem poised for now. Um, you know, I don't want to be like a sort of like doomsday personality or something, especially on the internet, you know, because I don't think like humanity's doomed, like necessarily. Um, I think that the Western Empire is doomed, though, and that's just a matter of that shouldn't be thought of as a radical position, because all empires are doomed. Obviously, they always collapse. Look at history. There's no such thing as one that didn't collapse. They always eventually collapse. So it's going to happen to this one. Maybe what's radical is thinking it's now, where we're right at the precipice of that. But see, I don't necessarily think it's something that's going to happen quickly either. I think we may just be in the process of a very, very slow decline. It might take another 10 or 20 years or something for things to get really genuinely explosive. But they seem explosive to me already, just looking at what's been going on in the streets. You know, there's real violence in the streets now. Violence between some segment of the population anyway, and the arms of state violence, the police, the military, and so on. It's hard for me to even understand, frankly, what's going on in the White House. Like, my impression is just like the government has become so dysfunctional and kind of clogged that it's become almost impossible for it to actually function and deal with anything in the area of long-range planning. Which makes it then very, very slow to react to dynamic crisis-style situations. And then when it does react, it reacts in suboptimal ways. You know, the hospital I was in, it wasn't just abuses that I suffered, it was also things I saw being done to other people, and just the general level of chaos and disorganization in this place. It's a big failure of intelligence. Big failure. People talk about 9/11 sometimes as being about a failure of intelligence. I think that one would have been kind of hard to foresee, maybe. Exactly, you know, but unless you were like a really big fan of Back to the Future, wink wink. But this one, I mean, first of all, I knew something was coming. Friends of mine felt the same about 2020. And initially, you know, it was the kind of thing that we were joking about. We all felt a little silly for having a feeling about it. Like, 2020, I don't know, man. It seems like a weird one, right? Seems like something big's probably, right? No, it couldn't be. And then it came, and it was. A lot of art predicted many aspects of it directly, so it was, you know, it was strongly known, I guess. But anyway, it was known about a bit intuitively in advance, and it could have been known about quite consciously in advance. And there's no argument about that in the United States, because the situation was already unfolding elsewhere in the world. Our government should have been on top of that. The blood pyramid has to sit in this half-concealed space. It's just what René Girard is talking about, with the way sacrificial violence has to be kind of half-conscious and half-unconscious. You can't be directly aware too much of the real sacrifice involved. And at the level of a society, it's just like there emerges kind of a sum total of societal sacrifice, that just all the people that are being abused by the blood pyramid tend to be the people at the bottom of it, although in truth everyone is abused by it. This is something I also want to stress. I think both when it comes to the police and when it comes to health care, the people that work in those jobs are themselves become very traumatized. You get traumatized working in a hospital, and you get traumatized working on the streets, because both places are places where there are real deal stakes, life or death situations, and that's traumatizing stuff. And so everybody working in those systems needs to be getting mental health care, but hardly anyone is, as far as I can see. And so that's abusive to those people. It's the equivalent of like sending people in to work in a mine or in some radioactive zone without giving them proper respiratory equipment, without giving them a hazmat suit, without, a lot of the systemic abuse that then comes out of those systems isn't even really proper direct systemic abuse. Some of it is. You can suffer direct systemic abuse as an individual. I suffered some of that at the hospital. For instance, just because the place was disorganized, people forgot a lot of details about my situation. If it had been more organized, those details wouldn't have been forgotten, etc. That's the direct consequence of just, it's like no individual person is responsible for it. It's just the whole way the place was structured made that almost inevitable. So that's direct systemic abuse. But a lot of the abuses I suffered were abuses that resulted from the people who worked in those environments having shut off their empathy because they just don't know what else to do. They haven't learned how to keep it open and hold space. So they're just using brute force repressive techniques, which are very, very unhealthy, especially in the long run, and then result in these weird zombie people that shouldn't really be interacting with the sick. It's a hard job to take care of the sick. But a big part of why it's hard is because you have to keep that empathy, that heart line open. And I saw so many people that were just completely shut down. And, we just came out of a crisis, so some degree of that was going to be inevitable. But it didn't have to be this bad. These people are fucked. And so the abuses that they passed on to me were often unconscious or halfway unconscious for them, I think, and are like the second order ripples of these undealt with trauma detonations. So it's very complicated, I think, when we're talking about the ways in which these big systems abuse us. I was just talking about hospitals, but you could say the same thing about the police, They too are working in a traumatic environment and are traumatized themselves, and then deal with it however they can deal with it, which is often not very well, and then they let universal human shortcomings, like the propensity towards racist ideation. Human beings are a little racist. That's my view anyway. It's just how people are. I've encountered so many kinds of racism in my life, shades of racism, as it were, subtle variations in it from person to person to person. And seen so many equally ridiculous and disgusting shades of it in myself, I just relate to it as like another aspect of human excrement, There's pooping, and there's also racism. It's just a fact of the species, And so, we expect the people to be hygienic with their bodies when it comes to pooping. We ought to expect them to do everything in their conscious power to not behave in a racist way. Even though, and this is the rub, and I think a part of what kind of the conventional conversation often misses, which just wants to split off the thing into the other always and say all the bad racists out there, but of course I'm not racist. Well, that's actually a dangerous thing to believe about yourself because it's not true. You are a little bit racist just by virtue of being a human being, and in the same way that you're just a little violent by virtue of being a human being. These things are all true about everybody. It's actually much better to know that that's true about yourself so that you can catch yourself leaning in those directions sometimes and consciously dial back, compensate. Okay, I wanted to talk a little bit about this synchronicity stuff. Sync has been very active in my life during this time, to such a degree that to question its basic reality now seems to me to be quite an absurdity. But yeah, God, the synchronous is just at the point. It is now officially at the point. I can't talk to you guys anymore about my personal synchronicity stories. Like, not because they're too personal or embarrassing or something. I mean, they have become quite personal and embarrassing, but you know me, that's never. I'll just blab into the internet about anything. It seems. But anyway, not because they're too personal or embarrassing, but because they are simply too complicated. They're so deeply hooked in, like it would, I'm going to have to shift, I think, more into an even more abstract level of talking about this stuff, I guess, on the channel. Try to talk about synchronicity more generally speaking. And so one statement I can now make about it in this general sort of way is that, yes, you can reach this level where synchronicity is so richly interwoven into your life that, at least from within the context that interwovenness paints for you, you will no longer feel a need to question whether or not it's there. You're still going to wonder about what it is, because it remains a mystery. So I still wonder about what it is. What is it? But that it is something that I can wonder about in a persistent way that suggests basic objectivity, i.e. it's something I only have partial knowledge about, because like I said, it remains a mystery. I don't know what it is. It's confusing. So clearly I don't understand it very well. Yet, it's something that I can detect in a persistent way over a long period of time. So it has basic stability. And those two things, persistence and stability on the one hand, and dynamics that transcend my ability to understand consciously, those two things together, I think, are a very strong indication of objectivity. When you add to that the fact that the phenomenon has been identified also by other people, and you can talk to those other people and recognize and understand what they're talking about to such a high degree of precision that you can work out kind of shared theories of synchronicity and so on with people, that just adds even more weight to its objective presence in a phenomenological sense. It is something present in human beings, that human beings, at least some number of human beings greater than one, i.e. some human beings, probably some percentage of the population, and maybe the entire population, but at least some percentage of the population consistently through the generations are able to perceive whatever it is. And so you see, in this sense of objective, it doesn't matter whether or not the perception is of something external or internal relative to the psyche. It's important to decouple the notion of objectivity from these more primitive notions to do with inner and outer. I think that really trips up a whole lot of people when thinking about this stuff. A fantasy is an objective thing. There's nothing subjective about it in terms of the fact of its existence. The content of it may be subjective or objective, but the existence of the fantasy as a thing that's just happening in your experience is relative to you, as the perceiver of that experience, simply a fact, an objective fact. That's a very obvious point, but it has these subtle kind of tentacles in it that influence the way we think about this stuff in ways that very often people don't seem to realize are the result of these, it seems to me, of these implications of language. So annoying. That was the hospital calling me, saying that I need to come in for more tests, etc. And I had to tell them that no, I'm not coming in for anything else because I'm done going to this hospital. I've already had my case transferred to another hospital. So I guess I didn't fully kind of complete my update about my life in general terms. I am receiving adequate medical attention finally, and COVID has just messed up everything in this city, so I have to wait still a very long time to get this stent removed and get the kidney stone finally blasted, but they're going to do it now in the least invasive way they possibly can going forward. It still is going to involve this stent being removed through my dick eventually, so that's going to be very unpleasant, but the actual stone removal is going to be shockwave lithotripsy like it should have been from the start now, so that's all that about that. But synchronicity, there's a stone in my body. I'm kind of in this birth process with, if you know about alchemy, that's a funny thing symbolically. But that's kind of what I mean. I can't separate the, I don't even know what to call this stuff. The synchronistic meaning. Jung might call it the psychological meaning, but that's so weird to call it that. It's the irrational meaning. I can't separate the irrationality from these things that happen to me anymore. It all seems like part of a big story to me. Now, I don't know if that's a defense mechanism of some kind to keep my brain oriented on a survival thing, a kind of a pretend story that keeps it doing that. That if I can imagine I'm in this novel and at least it's exciting, that's some kind of comfort to me or something. It's hard to deny things like that. It is quite a comfort to think of the world in that way, to live in your myth in that way. But just because it feels good and comforting doesn't mean there's something wrong about it. And it also doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. I think it's good to have a natural suspicion. That relates to having a natural curiosity. You should never be so sure a thing is what it appears. That's especially true in your mind. So, I'm definitely not saying just go for the pleasure zones in your mind, but maybe that's a particular area where it really oughtn't to be so discouraged. I think the point is that human beings want to live in a story, and so they'll make a big dramatic story accidentally, unconsciously, if they feel that they're not living in one with sufficient meaning. And the big story is the story about the rise and collapse of these blood pyramids that we're all trapped inside of. And the idea of liberation from that. That begins with the tyranny of the hierarchy within. That involves the consciousness and then the instincts and all of this. Every individual is in bondage to the brutal and tyrannical aspects of nature that exist within them. And in bondage to various other aspects of it. In truth, we're in bondage to all of it. We are products of nature, and this whole experience that we're in is a product of nature, and it is the way that it is because of nature, and we're all stuck with that possibility space. Now, I'm someone who thinks we are all also chronically underestimating the size of the possibilities there. I think there are so many things human beings might do. And I don't think it's a foregone conclusion that we have to live in blood pyramids at this level of bloodiness. They're always going to be a little bloody. There are certain aspects of it that you can't eradicate. And in the end, most people wouldn't want to. We're always going to have sports. There's going to be a need, at least in game form, for people to rank and hierarchicalize on the basis of innate things, like physical prowess and strength, for instance. There's always going to be beautiful people that other people love to look at. That's hierarchical organization on the basis of innate things like facial symmetry and attractiveness. Not all of that stuff is innate. Some of it's about how it intersects with particular cultural desires, both conscious and unconscious, etc. But those things are still kind of big transcendental things relative to the individuals. From the individual standpoint, it's still just this kind of fixed thing. The society you're in finds you beautiful or it doesn't, and you get a hierarchy there. People hate that stuff, but they love it too. We watch all these TV shows about fashion models and blah blah blah. These are complexities to do with human nature. The thing about the blood pyramid, though, is that it's so terrifying. Which is why it has to sit halfway in, halfway out of consciousness. If we really see it for the terror that it is, everyone would agree to destroy it. But that's why there's the relation to the vampire. You kill it and it just rises from the dead again. It's immortal. It just reconstitutes itself. So the only way to really prevent it is to address it within, probably. Because really the protests and the riots and so on are just another kind of stage in the cycle of violence. Whether or not that cycle ends up being transcended is going to depend on the degree to which people can hold the problems in front of them consciously and have an actual transformational process occur to resolve those problems. The myth is just as present as the literal reality to me these days. That's quite amazing. I had to sacrifice a lot to get these goggles on here. So people should also know that about alchemy and video alchemy. It's just a way of coming into contact with something that we really don't understand, but that clearly has a lot to do with God. And that thing, that kind of diamond sphere in the middle that you're floating around like a satellite, that thing, I don't know how to describe this. There's just a real danger in it. It's benign, in a sense, because what it has in mind is your continued perfection. But I think there's something about the increase in awareness. This is really, this is kind of weird, but it seems like your awareness increases, and then suddenly a little campaign launches in your unconscious. It says, okay, we have this new awareness. Now we need to loop back around to a bunch of things that happened before and apply that new awareness. Because the whole problem was we were in a situation that is kind of the sum total result in some kind of way of all these previous situations I was in that I didn't understand, where terrible things happened to me, or this or that or the other, where I learned I couldn't trust people, where I learned blah, blah, blah. And so you get stuck somewhere because of that. Certain conditions end up getting met. The transcendent function can activate, which is just a thing that's going to help you transcend a big life problem that you can't grapple with as a solitary ego anymore. And so it's going to increase your awareness through kind of mixed strategies, I'd say, that we might collectively refer to as alchemical strategies. Funny thing. It's some kind of an angel with wings, obviously. Crowley's quite correct to call it the Holy Guardian Angel. So this thing launches, and it guides you through this process. And at the end of it, you get this awareness, but then it's like it has to be used right away. That's the cost of it. You don't get to gain it just for recreation. You know what I mean? A genuine increase in awareness is just, on some level psychologically, it's just like begging to be used. It's like, and I think part of the transcendent function is that it's going to set up like repetitions of old traumas for you so that you can go through them again and see them in a more subtle way. And somehow I feel this is related to like the Hall of Records, to the idea that our experience is being summed somewhere at the group effect level. I just can't imagine that nature is throwing all of this primary data away. And I think that there's probably some high-level informational process that's conserving it somehow in some way. Maybe in a quite compressed way, but in some kind of way, I think. And so if your awareness is increased in this way, the hive has kind of made an investment in you. And it would like you're a big, nice eyeball for it now. And so it would like to understand in a deeper way these problems that in some way you were born to suffer through, born to understand. So 2 things to note here. One is this is an example of what I'm talking about, living in a myth, You can listen to what I'm doing here. All of these things I'm saying are adding meaning and kind of, the support of meaning or something to the events that have transpired. I can think, oh, it's a big lesson, I'm learning something, and I'm learning something not just for myself, but for the collective, and, those are healthy, stabilizing psychological things to think about a big sort of trauma, and things that can be true about it in many ways that don't involve this sort of the strange non-local ways we imagine about the unconscious, etc. It can be true just in the sense of, a very bad thing happened to me at a hospital here, and I want to help make sure that doesn't happen to other people here. And so I'm trying to figure out how best to do that. So it can be true in that way, It usually is true, and that's often how people come to peace with their traumas, is by understanding that it can help them become wiser and help their tribe become wiser. It's just that basic kind of thing. But of course, I'm talking about something a bit different as well, which is situating some things in a properly transcendental space and saying, like, no, there's a bigger information ordering process going on in my life experience that seems very story-like and kind of drama-hungry and has turned my life into a kind of book. Or it just feels that way anyway, living within it. And I am just sort of at a point now where, synchronicity is a part of that. And it's all kind of wrapped together for me in this it's just the spiritual half of life. And I feel better when I exist in relation to that half. I wouldn't know how to not exist in relation to it now, though, is the point, unless I just repressed it unless I literally just start and I've experimented with this, at various times with this, particularly early on. You think, I can just ignore it. I don't have to look at those numbers. That doesn't mean anything. Nope. There's not a 55 over there. It doesn't exist, and even if it does exist, who cares? It's just a number. It's just a number. It's not, you tell yourself these things, but it's not going to work. Not if you've really got the bug. There is too a 55 over there, and I did too notice it, and it does have meaning to me. So there, it's just, that's at least how it is in my brain. I can try to pretend like it isn't the case, but oh, that's very nice. A very dear friend is just checking in on me. I feel very grateful for the support that I have in my life right now. It's needed. So, do you want to live in spectacular recreations of the traumas of your childhood? With 100x the awareness that you had as a child or something, so that you can savor every delectable detail of the horror, That sound fun to you? Then have a look at Synchronicity, I'm joking a little bit, but not really. The New Age world does a huge disservice to humanity by painting synchronicity as this benign thing. Yeah, it's benign ultimately in the cosmic Abraxian sense, where everything that happens to you is benign because it's all part of the divine suffering of the species in the weird cosmic drama level, But that's not the level that counts as an individual human being. I mean, you can partake of that higher understanding, but you still have to suffer through the terrors. Okay. Launched a lot of threads there, but I really want to just sever them all now. And, don't think we're done with Monster Squad. I'm just temporarily a little incapacitated and unsure about my immediate financial future and etc. So I have, I just don't have the time or the ability really to make a proper installment. So it's on pause, but it's coming back. Monster Squad is a masterpiece. We're going to look at it all. But it's also a film that seems to have 9/11 precog and Corona precog kind of perfectly crossfaded together. And many of these films seem, in fact, Gremlins 2 in particular seems packed to the gills with Corona. And this is something my friend and colleague David has noted as well, David Charles Plate. It's like the same movies that had the 9/11 tremors also have COVID-19 tremors. Another weird thing I haven't heard anybody mention, I'm the numbers guy, so I'm like paying attention to this stuff. I watched Chappelle's thing, which he titled 8 minutes 46 seconds, which is the amount of time that the knee was on George Floyd's neck as he died. It's weird because Chappelle starts talking about like sinks. He's like, I can't get that number out of my mind because it's my time of birth. And then later in the video, I think he mentions like another sink, something to do with his birthday. But to me, I heard 8:46, and was immediately like, that's when Flight 11 crashed into the North Tower. That's the first number on most 9/11 timelines. 8:46 a.m. So it's another significant esoteric interlinking between the events that are happening now and the events that happened on September 11th. In any case, the two events seem to be pre-associated in the prophecies, so what a strange thing. It's so strange, though, that it makes me start to wonder about the reliability even of my own memory, and about the possibility that the past is being modified in response to things going on in the present. In other words, maybe these films weren't this way 2 years ago. Now, I know that sounds really strange. What could I even possibly mean by that? I don't know what I mean. It's just it's a weird impression I get sometimes. I think it seems so intuitively wrong that I just kind of tend to assume that's got to be a kind of an illusion, a little mental illusion, resulting from some other strange ambiguity in how we relate to something like synchronicity, you know? Because on some level, it's just almost like equivalent to what we're saying anyway, you know? We're saying that something in the future changed these films, put things in these films that were made in the past. When does that happen? You know, nothing about it is coherent. It breaks our fundamental perception. So, do you see what I mean? It's almost like, how could you even tell apart a scenario where the films you remember are changing because they're actually changing in the past, like dynamically as you go forward in the future, because you're somewhere in that loop, you know, versus it's a one-time thing that happened and changed the films in a fixed way that then has been consistent as you've been moving through time. Do you see what I mean? It almost seems like there's a problem of like not having an anchor point for your frame there or something. I don't know, I'll have to think about that a little more nuanced, in a more nuanced way when I'm not on all these painkillers. In any case, I'm just blown away by the coronavirus precog in Gremlins 2. So we're going to have to look at that at some point as well. It even contains Trump calling in the military. You know, it's a very accurate impression in that one. I wonder what's coming next. I'm certain we'll see it foreshadowed in the films, you know. It's time to watch some more movies. Okay, that's it for now. See you in the future.